know what the latest science says about how you can grow as an athlete and enjoy your sport more. Well, the aim of this podcast is to dive into the science, take out some aspect of it, look at it, and then apply it in a real world way to you in the hope that you can do just that. Get more out of your sport. I'll be having these conversations every week with my fellow coach, Scott Finley, who is also a PhD student, so understands that scientific background, but also works in the real world with real athletes just like you. And so we will try and apply the scientific knowledge to you in your real world environment in the hope that it's helpful. So we hope that you enjoy the conversation that you're about to listen to and that it helps you get the most out of your sport.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Elevate Multisport Academy podcast. I'm here with Joel again. We are looking at another scientific article. This week the title of the article is The Psychological Status During and After the Preparation of a Long Distance Triathlon Event in Amateur Athletes. So basically what they're doing, this is an observational study, which just means they tested and observed the athletes. They didn't try to change anything. It's a longitudinal study, which means that they observed them over a longer period of time. In this case, it was the 6 months before a long distance triathlon. And what they were looking at in this case was their psychological state. So they measured things like mood, but we'll touch on that later on. Well, quick fire questions.
Go for it.
Is psychology an important factor in triathlon performance?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Number 2, do you think the psychological state would be different in short distance and long distance athletes?
Good question. And it doesn't have to be.
Okay, thank you. And third and final question, can coaches have a significant impact on the psychological profile of athletes in the build-up to an event?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the basic information about the study, just to set the scene.
Can I just say, I'm gonna interrupt, and I'm just going to say that I'm excited about this one because I think for the listeners to kind of stick with this, because I think it has some really positive practical applications, and it was a really good read for me. So we'll go into it a little bit more later, but good kind of practical stuff here that can really I think help people involved, particularly in ultra endurance events of any kind.
Good. Okay. So the study had 32 participants, 13 females, 19 males. They had to be training for their first long distance triathlon, so that's their first either 70.3 half Ironman or Ironman event. Long distance in this case is actually referring to 70.3 or the half Iron distance. So they were all entered into the Mont Tremblant 70.3 in Canada. They went through physiological tests. Each participant was given a 24-week training plan built by the research team. And interestingly, each training session was supervised by 2 kinesiologists and a triathlon coach, and then again monitored by Training Peaks software.
Very professional.
And yes, very professional. Every month, participants completed 4 questionnaires about their motivation, their positive and negative emotions, passion, and finally one that looked at their mood state. Any comments about methods quickly before we jump into results? Anything you want to say about
that? Not a lot, other than just very quickly to say it wasn't a massive sample population, and the level of the athletes, they were more completers than competers. They hadn't been involved in multisport for very long. But again, to emphasize, I don't think that necessarily takes away from the sort of the powerful applications that we can get from this in terms of how we can in terms of how ultra endurance sport can be really positive. And I still think there's some good results despite the small sample population. It was a well done study. It's just not done with that many people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like one of the things with studies like this is it's a commitment from the athletes. So the athletes were getting a training plan for free and all that sort of stuff. So actually they're gaining out of it, but they're also committing to filling in a survey every month and performing all these tests. So it is a bit of a commitment for the athletes, which is why it's often quite difficult to recruit that many.
Mm-hmm.
So quickly on the results, understandably, there's a lot of numbers in the paper, so we're kind of going to skim over and summarize some of their findings rather than throw a load of numbers at you. One of the
say, Scott, do we need to say what they were looking at? Like the type of, you spoke about the sort of psychological states. Do we need to speak about some of those, or are you going to touch on those when you go through the results?
No, you can jump into that quickly if you want.
Okay, fantastic. So we had this sample population of people. They were doing a 70.3. They were fairly new to the sport, and over the 6 month, what the researchers were looking at was kind of four main areas. So motivation, so their levels of motivation during that training phase, their levels of passion during that training phase. And so we're looking at not just where it starts and finishes, but how it oscillates sort of throughout. The next one is technically called positive negative effect. So that is the positive effect is sort of how harmonious you feel with the activity that you're doing, how much it resonates with who you are, how much it just fits with you and your personality and all of those things. So we're looking for that to be, quite high. A higher score there is better. And we're also looking at the negative effect. Essentially, that is almost how much the event controls you versus you controlling it. So if it becomes something that's very obsessive, then that is sort of a strong negative effect. The whole process, the training, the goals, the aims are in control of you rather than the other way around. So again, we want to be careful and aware of that balance and make sure it doesn't take over too much with not enough positive and too much negative. And then lastly, just mood. So a psychological measure called profile of mood states has been used in all sorts of sports for years and years and years. And that just looks at basically, mood, kind of how happy you are, really. So through the course of the entire 6 months and in the build up to the event, with some kind of interviews and reference points afterwards as well. So that's what was being looked at with the demographic, something that is relevant to any of us, really anyone involved in any kind of sport, but certainly sports where the demand is quite high. And so there's a potential impact, right? If you're signing up for something that's quite big, it's going to require a lot of lifestyle change and a lot of influences on your life. These things become key. So how much they were influenced by the training has a real practical application to listeners, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've measured them for those reasons. They've measured those things for those exact reasons that you said. They're important for this type of sport.
Yeah. Results.
Okay, so just as a quick caveat, in the 6 months, only 26% of the questionnaires were not completed by the athletes. They've not worded that greatly. Just 74% of the questionnaires were completed.
Mm-hmm.
They recommended in future studies they add in further questionnaires, so to monitor things like symptoms of overtraining and depression, anxiety, and emotional management. So we can touch on that later on, but so essentially they're saying those things would have been good to measure as well. There was no significant difference in motivation levels throughout, whether athletes were intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. So they obviously found out whether people were intrinsically or extrinsically motivated at the start, and those individual athletes did not their motivation levels did not differ between the types of motivation. So I'll just quickly say the difference between those two, Joel.
Yeah, of course. So intrinsic motivation, I'm doing it because I want to do it. There's no other reason, no external source of motivation. Extrinsic motivation classically might be in professional sport: money, fame, power, cars, whatever else that might come with it. I'm doing it not because I like it, I'm doing it because of what I might get from it. And they're the significant differences between those two.
Although actually in triathlon, maybe the 1% might get the cars and the money and the fame, but
that's really true. But it could be, so rather than kind of fame and money and power in a kind of celebrity way, it could just be status with my work colleagues. Like, I'm not doing it, I'm doing it because it looks cool and it gets me kudos and credit and all those things, or it might be because of image or a particular version of me that I want to kind of portray. It's when it starts to swing to those sort of more outside influences, the praise that you might get from someone else, those kind of things. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott. I'm just going to go off at a tangent. I think classically what we would say is that some extrinsic motivation is not necessarily bad, but broadly speaking, intrinsic motivation is preferable. We want people to work from a place of sort of their own passion and kind of their own interest, as much as possible. Would that be fair?
Yeah. I mean, again, not to tangent too much, but previous research project I worked on was about financial incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea with financial incentives is that you use it as a hook to bring someone in. So it's that external extrinsic motivation for someone to do something, whether that's lose weight or participate in community events. And the idea is that you give them that for a short period of time to hook them in and start, and then they continue on that path themselves because of newfound intrinsic motivation, maybe, or enjoyment, or whatever it is. So yeah, exactly right. It's going to benefit you more to be intrinsically motivated, and I think, bringing it back to the study, I think most of the people in the study seem to be, from what they said, but what motivation people had at the start remained the same throughout. So the intrinsically motivated people stayed intrinsically motivated.
Yeah.
And likewise for the extrinsically motivated people.
Me again, and I'm going to interrupt the conversation just for 20 seconds to point out we've spoken about some extrinsic hooks that can draw people into something that's really good for them. And if you sign up to Elevate now, then you're able to get discounted price on any of our pre-order courses that are coming over the next couple of months. So why don't you take advantage of that discount, sign up for those. The price will go up as soon as the course is published in just a few weeks from now. So sign up and gain not just the discount, but also the knowledge that you'll get through the course. And we hope to see you on the platform soon.
One final comment on the results, and then maybe we can have a chat.
Yep.
This is kind of something you mentioned as well. They talk about needing the right balance of arousal, motivation, anxiety to perform. As I said, you mentioned something about that earlier on. You don't want to be too over motivated and do too much training, or you don't want to be too anxious and not be able to perform. So they recognize that balance, I think, is especially important in relatively new athletes, because they've not got that racing experience to sort of calm themselves on the start line. It's about balancing that in the build up to it.
Yeah, exactly. And those, whether a level of anxiety can be helpful or not, it's something where I think this is where coaches can come in really useful. So in the study, levels of anxiety were slightly higher at the start when people were entering this program of essentially a program of change. It was new. You can understand anxiety would be a little bit higher. That reduced over the first sort of few weeks into a kind of a middle phase where everything was, there was far less anxiety. And then that just picked up again in sort of the final week before the event, where obviously people were suddenly, okay, the event's coming around. However, in the interviews with some of the athletes that they conducted after they'd actually done the event, what they found was that anxiety just before the event wasn't coupled to a feeling of not being ready. It wasn't an anxiety of, oh my goodness, it was more of an anxiety like, I'm quite excited. And so it's important to understand, you can just call it anxiety, but actually it might be quite positive. It might be the body getting ready just before an event. It might be quite natural. We might not be looking to get rid of all of that. And a coach can help steer someone through that at the start of a process. It might be that a coach wants to make sure that someone isn't feeling too overwhelmed, for an athlete to understand that that's natural, but not to feel too overwhelmed, and adjust things so that they feel settled, calm, in control of the process they're in.
Yeah. I think maybe anxiety is too vague a term for it. It's more encompassing than that, isn't it? It's, as you say, it's feeling overwhelmed because of this, but actually a bit nervous about this particular aspect, and maybe it all does pile neatly into anxiety, but it's not quite as simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on the results, or should we have a bit of a chat about it, about the
Well,
paper?
I mean, not to kind of jump straight to the end and be a bit of a spoiler, but spoiler alert anyway. I think that the big take home is that it was a really highly positive experience. And so we'll unpack that again
Yeah.
in a minute. But again, for people who are listening, so I talk a lot about, endurance sport. It can be quite heavy. It can be something where obsessive tendencies are sort of risked. There's that culture of more is better and blah, blah, blah. And, it's something that I've felt in the past, like just the weight of all of the training and the volume and the effort and the tiredness, all of that. So I feel like I come at it from a point of view of, oh, we need to be a bit careful here. It can be a really good thing, but let's be careful. What was really helpful for me to read in this was that essentially across that spectrum of things they were looking at, the motivation, the passion, the positive, negative effect, and the mood, this was a really positive experience for everyone. And so I think that is a really key takeaway that for listeners signing up to ultra endurance events, swim, bike, run, row, multi-sport, whatever that might be, can be a really, really good life affirming thing that actually picks up, your general mood and who you are as a person and allows you to function better in and around sort of around sport in your general life. And that's the main take home point, I think. And there's lots of other sub lessons underneath that.
Yeah, I mean that that sort of blends nicely into one of my comments, but that I feel like you kind of get maybe there's the two extreme ends of the spectrum when someone's training for an event like this. You get someone who, as you said, says I need to do more, 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 and piles the training on. They feel the pressure. They're anxious about completing the distance. That can obviously lead to kind of injury, illness, or burnout, or whatever it is. The other side of that is people who think they're doing enough but aren't, and then either don't have the race they want, or they don't complete it, or whatever it is. I think the good thing about this paper was that they had the coaches set the plan. So they had this 24-week plan that the coaches wrote them, or the kinesiologists, and so they followed this program to make sure that they weren't adding too much on, they weren't undercooking it either, and not doing enough. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I think, especially speaking about motivation, it's difficult not to finish a run and think I'm unstoppable. I'm going to go and do it the same again tomorrow, the same again this evening, or extend things longer than they need to be. So having doesn't necessarily need to be a coach. Having someone to bounce ideas off and make sure that you're not over or underdoing it, I think is really important to have in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Two things come out of what you just said for me, and that is there is the sort of the obvious aspect of coaching, if I can put it that way. People think of a coach as here are some reps and sets, let's make sure that you do what you need to do. And I think to your point, important people work with a coach, especially as the events get longer, the demand is higher, the event is more complex or more unknown. That you've
Yeah.
got that physiological component. What comes out of this study as well is the psychological component. And you spoke at the start about people feeling, overwhelmed by it, the challenge, the whatever it might be. And that comes back to something that actually I recorded a discussion last week with Paul Chowdhury, a local Edinburgh athlete, really experienced for the tapering course that we've got on the Elevate platform. And we spoke about the sort of broken expectations and how that can cause a problem. So a coach not only can work physiologically, but they also, out of this study, and I think, it makes sense, need to work psychologically with athletes. And often that is around setting the right expectations and the right psychological approach to an event like this. So that if people are listening to this and they say, well, I've been in the sport for ages, I'm a completer, not a completer. I think that there's a massive value in coaches helping higher level, more experienced athletes think more like completers, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from the reassessment of goals and making sure that goals are in line, they feel achievable, and that they can be adjusted. That's very, very difficult to do on your own as an athlete. You
Yeah.
almost always need that outside voice. And again, this idea of mentoring, any decent CEO in any business has a mentor because they can't bounce all the ideas off of themselves. They need someone else. So, massive, I think, takeaway in terms of if you're an athlete, work with a coach. If you're a coach, make sure that there's the psychological component that you're working with the athlete on as well, and it's not just the physiology. And we haven't even spoken about how a coach should manage, these or take note of these psychological measures as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, in the study, as I said, they didn't change anything. They had the program and they monitored the athlete throughout. So that's in a real world scenario. Maybe you're not doing these actual measures. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but it's about recognizing these symptoms and adapting to that and managing the load. So you're angry and sad. Are you overtraining? Is that something
Mm-hmm.
um that's how that's affecting you?
Yeah. It made me
You need
think,
to change
Scott,
things
that
up.
for those listeners who know Training Peaks and loads of other coaching platforms out there that often have the little like as simple as a smiley face emoji
Yeah.
or a how did you feel today slidey bar. Now, I don't know about you. I know that you coach, obviously, you've coached for a long time, lots of athletes, you've used Training Peaks and those kind of platforms. How many people, so direct question, how many people do you know who just almost their default is to fill out, just tick that little smiley face or move the slidey bar so that you get a score on the psychological measures? For me, it's no one ever.
Well, interestingly, I've had one of my recent athletes does do that, and that's
Yeah.
really useful. But and that's exactly where you're going with this, I suppose,
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
that it is a useful measure to have, and I know that issues we've had in the past with getting people to do even like HRV and things like that
Mm,
regularly in the morning because
yeah.
that's it's another physiological measure, but exactly that. It is a really useful measure to be able to say, how did that session go? Oh, it went great. Maybe their paces were off, but they felt great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a win, for that session.
I'd say it's almost the important measure, and
Yeah.
like I'll take this away and employ it, with my athletes and possibly with myself as well. It's as simple. You don't even need Training Peaks. It's as simple as having a notepad and after every
Hmm.
session, drawing the appropriate, emoji. How smiley is your face to
Yeah.
on a scale of very smiley to very sad, and also just how did you feel? And that's going to give you a really great psychological marker and a pretty good physiological marker as well. And if you track those and you see too many unhappy faces, then you know that something is off, and that's when a coach can step in.
Or if you're data driven, get it into a spreadsheet and track it and make graphs and all that fun stuff that I enjoy doing. So
Yeah, whatever your poison.
yeah. Um, Worth saying as well that just about about this study, they've said long distance. To me, long distance triathlon is Ironman distance.
Hmm.
What these athletes are competing in is, again, to me, is middle distance. Maybe that's not a global term, but um, I wondered whether it was about avoiding confusion between other sports. I mean, middle distance running is that sort of 1,500
Yeah.
meter distance, isn't it? So, do you think that's what it is, or?
Yeah, possibly, but I think there's an application because essentially what we're doing is putting people into a significant training load over a significant period. So whether you're a 1,500-meter runner, whether you're training for a crit race, whether it's a wheelchair marathon, whether it's a multi-sport event, like it doesn't really matter if you are putting yourself into a long-term process where you're going to have to absorb a lot of load. And by that, I mean something that is psychologically, physiologically a bit stressful, like it's more than you've done before. It doesn't matter whether you're novice, Olympian, or what event you're in. I think that this is still relevant, which is why it's a really interesting study. Um, yeah, because it's not just applicable to that entry-ish level 70.3 athlete. We don't have the data for how long they took, but my guess would be that we're looking at people who are taking maybe 7 hours, 7 to 8 hours to do a half Ironman. But I think that it's as appropriate to a 800-meter runner as it is to an Ironman or half Ironman athlete.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, Quick point on the study, and then we can maybe move on a bit. you said it was a very well done study on maybe not that many athletes, but very well done study. And I just wanted to comment on the fact that they had 3 members of staff at each, what they said, unless it was a typo, they had 3 members of staff at each training session.
Mm-hmm.
So, they did minimum of 2 sessions per discipline per week, including S&C.
Mm-hmm.
So over the 24 weeks, that's 192 sessions. And that's assuming that the athletes did every single session together, which I doubt they did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge undertaking from the research team to do that. And I think it's, it does speak to the professionalism of the research team, because that's a lot of time in the lab, bringing everyone lab or the pool or whatever it is to bring people in and have them there.
It is practically speaking as well, Scott. I think that the take home for me would be that's quite a lot of training again for people who are entry-ish level into a sport. We're basically talking about training pretty hard 6 days a week, aren't we? And
Yeah.
again, let's go back to the outcome. The outcome was that was really life affirming and a really good experience for everyone. So, the amount of people that, I've heard say, oh, how do you do the amount of training that you do? Oh my goodness, like it must be so hard. I'm like, well, there's effort involved, but the net gain is really significant. It would be easier to sit on the sofa, but it wouldn't make my life better. So I think, again, let's not be scared about doing a sort of decent amount of exercise, and that it can be really good for you as a person.
Both acutely and chronically. You think chronically, so long term, we're thinking gaining fitness, gaining health, gaining quality of life, all that sort of stuff. But day to day, you do a run in the morning, you do a early morning swim. I don't know about you, but I'm so much more productive that day if I do that. Get up, train before work. I get so much more done during the day, and just have a better day.
Yeah, 100%. And this study as well, to point out with the results, they weren't miserable all the way through and then they loved it in the end. They loved basically the whole process. Like even when they were a bit anxious at the start, their mood was still really good. So it's like jump straight in. Life is better, keeps getting better. You love it at the end. And crucially, one of the things I didn't even write down in my notes, but it comes to mind now, is that you would have expected them to have this really positive thing, do the event, and then maybe have some post-race blues. And actually, none of them did. That wasn't reported in any single participant, because in the interviews, they said they still felt on a high. That achievement meant that they kind of carried some of that really good feeling on. Where I think we can loop this back to practical application for athletes and coaches is that then it's a case of choosing what the next thing is. What is the next goal? And that doesn't have to be another sporting goal. That can be a new thing, any kind of thing in life that gives you some feeling of purpose, gives your life some kind of structure, something to work towards. And we know purpose is massively key in the well-being of anyone. Like being purposeless kills you. Like we know that will make you die younger. So having a purpose is really good. So again, for athletes and coaches, go through this process. That's good. Do the event. That's good. Afterwards, you're still on a high. And then if you pick something else, you can just kind of keep riding that wave. Doesn't mean life is going to be all sunshine and rainbows, but it means this is a good life affirming thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you said bowl as well, because it's, that expands it to more experienced athletes. So it's not a specific goal of completing the race. It's whatever your goal is. So if you were trying to complete the race in 7 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours, whatever it is, and you did or you didn't do that, it's not, right, let's go and hang up the running shoes and never do this again. It's, look at that goal, recalibrate. Was it achievable? What do I want to do next time? Do I even want to do this distance next time? Am I going to jump around a bit? Am I going to go up distance or down distance? It's like one of the great things about endurance sport or endurance triathlon is there's such a range of things you can actually do.
There is. And this study, right, it looked at that harmonious positive effects, right? How in tune with your goals were. And that comes down to setting really good goals. I'm going to bounce people straight back to the 6 keys to unlock your potential free course that there is on Elevate, because we talk about appropriate goal setting there and how absolutely crucial that is to make sure that you're not picking the goal because it's what your mate is doing, or because it's what everyone in the club is doing, or it's because of what you feel you should do. That's a really dangerous one. Red flag, red flag, red flag. It's something that you want to do. So the question after an event like this is, what do you want to do with this next? What do you want to do with this experience? This thing that you found, the body that you have. So again, yeah. So bounce back to the 6 keys workshop. Will tell you more about goals, and we'll have another goal setting course coming up in the autumn, ready for the off season.
And just to say as well, if you want to do something because your friends are doing it, that doesn't make it a bad goal. It's about the appropriateness of it for you. It's not, don't do something just because your friends are doing it. If you want to do it because of the social aspect, maybe a group of you are doing a race from the club and train together, and experience the race together. That's a great goal and great thing to do during the season. Again, as Joel said, it's about what's appropriate for you, what you want out of your body, as you said.
Yeah. Is there something in it for you? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, or I'm not sure, it's probably something. There's a better goal.
Yeah. Final wrap up comments.
Sorry, go on.
Just one thing to say, which was that I like, so a couple of quotes from the interviews at the end, which was, we mentioned anxiety and things like that, and in the interviews post race, the people that were interviewed said that they weren't really that anxious before the race, because they felt they were ready, and they knew that it had worked hard to finish. And I think that's a really important part of endurance sports. You can do the work. If you've done the work, you can look back at it and say, I have done this. It gives you confidence building. So yeah, physiologically, you're building your endurance and everything. But I think when you can look back from a psychological point of view, when you look back at a 4-hour ride and an hour brick run or whatever it is, that has done you a lot of good. You can look at that and say, I'm ready for this race. So yeah, that was nice for me to see that they felt ready and they went into it ready to enjoy it, which is great.
Yeah, agree. I would also just point out again that this is, if anyone is listening and thinking that this is a bit of a psychological conversation, this is also a performance conversation, because the measures that we're looking at, or that they were looking at in the study and that we've discussed, your sort of intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, whichever works for you, there isn't a right or wrong, but your motivation feeds into passion. And then that kind of flows, if you like, through that positive, negative effect and also mood. So all 4 of those things are interrelated. And if they're all in line and everything is as it should be and working as it should be, and the motivation is good and the passion is still there, and you've got lots of, positive effect, and your mood is great, your performance is better. So we're not just talking about happy people, I didn't make my goal or whatever. This feeds into positive performance, and yes, a feeling, as you said, of I'm ready for the event, but also a feeling of like you're actually going to perform better as a result of all of these things. So setting really good goals, working with a coach, making sure that together you look at all of these psychological factors will feed into a better performance, a better outcome. And that's only going to lead on to, an increased likelihood of doing another event. So, for coaches, a really easy take home as well, like I didn't mention earlier, is we talked about the emojis and the sliding scale. When you actually talk to athletes as well, I think we often say, how are you? How are you? How are you doing? But there's that idea from, again, counseling and therapy, of you say, how are you doing out of 10? And then it allows people to say, it challenges the thought a little bit more. No one just brushes it off with, I'm all right. They go, I'm 4 actually. And that's straight into a conversation about, well, why, how is it 4? What's going on? And then you can adjust. So for coaches, how are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? You can do that without any training peaks or spreadsheets or anything. That's a nice kind of person to person, human to human type question that I think can be really valuable in terms of assessing psychological state of an athlete.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember doing a course a while ago it was called good conversations, I think it was. And the idea was that you ask someone this question, what are you on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 is you sitting at home on the sofa. So you've already set the boundaries of that. So they can't say 0 because they're there having the conversation with you. So you're framing it positively. So if they say a 1, you say, oh, why is it not a 0? And or why is it, if they say a 2, why is it not a 1? What positive things have you got going for you that have led you to that?
Yeah.
So if you need to frame it more positively, you can do it like that.
Yeah, and we've said that this is a positive experience from the data that we're looking at in this recent study, which is really good. But don't mishear what we're saying. There will still be ups and downs. There'll be sessions and days and weeks that you don't enjoy as much. But then it's a case of doing that thing. Okay, I feel a bit 4 out of 10, and reframing and doing the thing that is resilience, which is, how can I see this positively? What's the opportunity here? How can I stitch a bit more meaning into whatever it is that I'm struggling with, or change it so that the whole thing feels a lot more positive. So there is an element of, you can really make a process like this work for yourself by being prepared to reflect and then reframe things and see them differently and see them in the most positive light that you can, like you said, Scott.
Good. All right. Well, happy to finish up there.
Absolutely. Good conversation. We did say, for everyone listening, that we thought we'd smash through this in 20 minutes, but I think what we're learning on podcast number 3 is that Scott and I are going to fill the full 40 minutes of a free Zoom chat every week. So be prepared for a 30 to 40 minute in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thanks for listening / watching, and we'll see you again next week.
Grand. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found that podcast really useful. And if you did, then it's just a sample of the information that's available across the Elevate platform. Where we want to drive you towards is the Team Elevate community pages. If you're enrolled on any one of the courses across the Elevate platform, you can sign up. And if you do, then it's the place where individuals like you can come together to grow, share ideas, ask questions, interact with us, and be the first to hear about upcoming courses and exclusive offers. So if you haven't signed up, sign up to Team Elevate now, and we hope to see you there soon.